My wife and daughter abandoned me while I was ill. Years later, they came back to claim my house. But let me start from the beginning. First, I was diagnosed with late-stage non-Hodgkin lymphoma, which was a shock. I'd always been active, ate well, and dutifully subjected myself to annual checkups. The oncologist informed me that the exact causes of the cancer were still uncertain, but there was a small chance of survival with treatment. I was determined to fight for my life. After receiving the diagnosis, I called my wife Simona and our teenage daughter Stefania. They were shocked to hear the news, but I reassured them that I would do my best to defeat the disease. However, I couldn't help but worry about how it would affect our family dynamics. The doctor warned that chemotherapy would be debilitating and that many marriages did not survive these treatments. Later that evening, I expressed my concerns to my wife. She assured me that she would be by my side throughout my illness and would do everything she could to support me. We were financially stable thanks to good insurance, significant savings, and a trust fund from my late grandfather. Our house was fully paid for, and I had put money aside for Stefania's college education in case something happened to me. A week later, I started chemotherapy, which was incredibly tiring. I came home completely drained, as if I had been hit by a train. I could barely feed myself, not to mention basic activities like bathing or walking. My wife and daughter stepped up to help me by taking care of the meals and the household chores and accompanying me to chemo appointments. I did what I could when I had the strength. This went on for 2 grueling months. However, I began to notice signs of agitation on their part. There was a growing reluctance every time I asked for their help. Even my daughter stopped responding when I asked her for something as simple as a glass of water. Things reached a breaking point when one day I had an early chemo appointment. I realized I was late and that my wife hadn't even left our room yet. I called her, and she told me to take an Uber to the hospital because she was tired. I was shocked by her response, but not knowing what else to do, I called an Uber. I also contacted the hospital for assistance since my wife wouldn't be there to support me. Fortunately, the driver was incredibly kind and even offered to take me home after the treatment. When I returned home that day, the situation had taken a worrying turn. After a few hours of rest, I found the courage to face my wife and my daughter, who were getting colder and colder. I asked them if they felt like I had become a burden to them. My wife admitted that they felt oppressed. My daughter shyly said that she didn't expect me to be so needy and demanding when I was sick. I decided that it was time to discuss possible solutions. I suggested hiring a nurse who could come a few days a week to assist me with daily activities and accompany me to chemotherapy sessions. To make things easier, I ordered a wheelchair, anticipating that there would be days when I would be too weak to walk. To my great relief, they accepted the proposal. I contacted the hospital for advice, and they sent me a sweet nurse who made sure that I never missed a chemo appointment, that I received drugs on time, and that she made a complete treatment plan, which included healthy meals. Everything seemed to be improving, and the doctors were satisfied with my progress. However, despite my efforts, my wife and daughter still did not seem satisfied. My wife in particular began to think that the nurse was taking over for her. I told her that if she was willing to take responsibility, we could fire the nurse. She asked me if we could find a male nurse, but I explained that there were none on the hospital's recommended list. The nurse we had was chosen for her experience with oncology patients and for her understanding of my specific needs. She was meticulous, attentive, and very respectful towards my wife and daughter. I made it clear that the nurse would only be replaced if they were willing to assume their responsibilities. My wife didn't care. She was unhappy and replied that I should have done more for myself instead of making my condition a problem for others. I tried to reason with her by explaining that there were days when I could barely lift my head, let alone stand. The chemotherapy had a strong impact on my body. In a fit of anger, she rushed upstairs and began slamming doors. I chose to ignore her tantrums, realizing that her negativity would only hinder my recovery. I focused on my health and my well-being. Later that evening, I received a phone call from my mother-in-law, who lived elsewhere, expressing her disappointment that I had brought another woman to her daughter's house. Technically, the house had been in my name since before our marriage, but I politely explained that I needed help and that the level of care I required exceeded what her daughter was willing to give me. I emphasized that the nurse's presence would only be temporary for the duration of the month of chemotherapy I had left. Unless the cancer persisted or got worse, she didn't seem entirely convinced. But in the end, she left me alone. For about a week after that conversation, the situation seemed relatively normal. My treatment continued to proceed smoothly. Then one fateful day, after returning from a chemotherapy session, I found a removal truck parked in front of my house. My wife and my daughter had packed up all their things and had informed me that they were going to stay at their mother's house. I was shocked, but the tiredness prevented me from expressing my feelings adequately. I turned to my daughter and asked her if this was what she really wanted. After all, she was old enough to make her own decisions. Her answer hit me hard. She told me she would rather live with her mother because she found it too difficult to live with me. My brother stepped in with a solution. He noticed that the nurse had spent some extra time with me that day and asked if I had any family members nearby who could help me. He lived 3 hours away and had 2 young children, but generously offered to take time off work to be with me until I found a more permanent arrangement. When he arrived, he was furious at what my wife had done. He pointed out to me that she had never had to work since we got married, and that I had always made sure that she did not. His wife Cecilia's sister was going through a painful divorce and needed a safe place to stay temporarily. She also didn't have much money and was studying radiology at a nearby university on a scholarship. My house was close to the university campus, which made it an ideal solution. I would have someone in the house in case of emergency, and she would have a refuge away from her ex-husband. I accepted the agreement, assuring my brother that Cecilia would not have to pay the rent. She could choose the bedroom she preferred. I didn't mind. My wife and my daughter had taken almost everything, leaving only the bed and some clothes. My brother stayed for the rest of the week, and Cecilia arrived on the last day. She helped her move and expressed her gratitude to me, promising to be attentive to clean and to help where needed. She was a genuinely kind-hearted person. I explained to her that she wouldn't have to do much because my nurse would be coming 7 days a week instead of the previous 4. I said goodbye to my brother and helped Cecilia get settled. Over the next few weeks, things went relatively smoothly. I missed my wife and daughter, but they didn't even bother to call me or visit me. Cecilia's presence proved to be a huge help. She took care of the shopping, most of the cleaning, and even the preparation of meals without ever complaining. About a month and a half after my wife's departure, they told me I was cancer-free. I immediately decided to ask for a divorce, freeing myself from a marriage that had proven to be of little support during my difficult journey. Once the divorce procedure had started, I began to recover my strength. My hair grew back, my scars started to heal, and I gained weight. I stuck to my healthy meal regimen most of the time, but gave myself a few days off to enjoy my favorite meals that I had missed during the illness. After 6 months, I finally felt ready to move on with my life. I called my old job, and they were willing to let me resume remotely. Also, because I intended to move, even though I was fond of my house, it contained too many painful memories. I wanted a new start. I intended to give the house to Cecilia, who had helped me when I was at my limit, showing me immense kindness even though we were practically strangers. I also didn't want to leave it to my ex and my daughter. More than a year had passed since my initial diagnosis, and I settled in well in the new house and in the neighborhood. I made friends with many people, including my neighbor Christina, a widow who lived alone and who only came to visit me at Christmas and for my birthday. Christina invited me to her porch to drink and chat, and told me the heartbreaking story of losing her husband to lung cancer. She emphasized the importance of life insurance for her family's financial security. I opened up about what happened with my ex-wife and daughter. Surprisingly, I still hadn't heard a word from them, but I had come to terms with it. I dedicated my time to new hobbies, in particular to woodworking. One day, when I was returning from my hardware store, Christina told me she had noticed some people wandering around my house. Fortunately, nothing was stolen, but they approached the door, knocked a couple of times, and in the end, they waited in the car. Christina thought about calling the police, but decided not to because she thought they could be family members. I asked her to describe them, and her description matched my ex-wife and daughter. I couldn't understand how they found my new residence, since only my brother and his wife knew my current address. I wondered why they were looking for me. Christina assured me that if they came back, she would handle the situation. Frankly, I had no desire to interact with them after they had abandoned me. Later that evening, I called my brother, who informed me that my wife and daughter had bothered Cecilia and her roommate in my old house. Fortunately, Cecilia had proof that the house had passed into her name and explained that she had bought it from me. I don't think my ex knew about the divorce. My lawyer had sent a copy to her mother's house, but maybe she had mistaken it for junk mail. The two showed up at my house again while I was working. I heard a knock and decided to check the security camera. I followed the plan that Christina and I had discussed, staying in the house but moving closer to the door to hear them better. Christina, being a good neighbor, came over to say hello and introduced herself. My ex-wife asked her if she knew a man named David who lived there. Christina seemed perplexed by the use of the past tense. My ex-wife explained that her husband had lived in this house before his recent and premature death after a long stay in the hospital. She continued to claim to be my closest relative, implying that the house was her property. Christina said that for a period, a person named David had lived there, a divorced man who had told her he had been abandoned by his wife from whom he had requested a unilateral divorce. Christina added that as far as she knew, I intended to leave all my assets to charity since I had no other family members besides my brother. For this reason, she found it strange to see two women snooping around in my house. Then Christina asked if they had a death certificate and a will. The two women replied in the negative. Christina explained that once in possession of those documents, they could take them to the registry office. If they were really the legitimate owners of the property, they could obtain the deed in their name. My ex-wife started screaming, stating that Christina had no authority to interfere in her affairs. She also accused her of being nosy. I was really embarrassed by her outburst. A part of me wanted to go out there and tell her off, but I chose to stick to our plan. Christina apologized and explained that she was just trying to be helpful. She went back to her house, and shortly after, my ex-wife and daughter left. I went to Christina's house to apologize. She said that while she found my ex-wife's behavior repugnant, she also found the outburst funny. I was determined to confront my wife, which happened the next day. I was sitting in my office when I heard a loud noise. I rushed into the living room and found the front window shattered and people screaming outside. It was my ex-wife. She had smashed the window, and my neighbors were outside trying to stop her. When I came out, two elderly neighbors were doing their best to stop my ex from causing any more damage. Both she and Stefania had sledgehammers in hand and had already destroyed some of my plants. I grabbed my ex-wife by the arm and asked her what she was doing. I told her and my daughter to leave the property, or I would call the police, which my neighbors had already done. She seemed hurt by my words and asked me why I hadn't contacted her after I recovered. I told her that when we got married, we made a promise to be by each other's side in sickness and in health, and she had broken that promise. I didn't want anything to do with her anymore. She told me that Stefania couldn't pay the university fees on her own. I replied that her daughter was fine abandoning me, and I'm ready to give up all my parental rights. You should have thought about it before abandoning me. I don't want to have anything to do with you two, I said. She called me selfish, which I found quite funny under the circumstances. I told her straight out that I would make sure she never got a penny from me again. Then she hit me with a bat just as the police arrived. They immediately arrested both her and my daughter. The police asked me if I wanted to press charges, and obviously I did. I had recorded everything that had happened and had already presented it to the police. Intrigued by what had brought my ex-wife back, I did some research. It turned out that her mother had died 2 months earlier, and they discovered that the house they were staying in did not belong to her or her husband, but to his cousin, who had decided to throw them out because he wanted to sell it. Since both of my ex-wife's parents were no longer there, she and our daughter sold most of their things and lived in a motel for a while. When they returned to our old house and saw Cecilia, they thought I was dead and looked for records of my possessions and purchases, and that's how they found me. They were accused of vandalism, attempted break-in, and attempted assault. Stefania was sentenced to community service, But my ex-wife faced a more severe sentence since it was an obviously premeditated act. I'm thinking of also obtaining a restraining order. At least for now, I won't have to worry about her for a long time. I'm thinking of also obtaining a restraining order. At least for now, I won't have to worry about her for a long time. With my ex-wife and daughter out of my life, I could finally focus on my recovery and rebuilding my future. Cecilia's presence in the house was a great comfort, and we developed a strong friendship. Her kindness and support were invaluable during such a tumultuous time. Over the next few months, I continued to regain my strength. I immersed myself in my woodworking hobby, finding solace and satisfaction in creating something tangible and beautiful with my hands. Christina, my neighbor, became a close confidant, and we often spent evenings on her porch sharing stories and laughter. One day, as I was finishing a particularly intricate piece of furniture, I realized how far I had come. From the brink of despair to a place of stability and hope, my journey had been arduous but transformative. The divorce was finalized, and with it I felt a profound sense of closure. The legal battles were behind me, and I was free to chart my own course. I decided to donate a portion of my savings to cancer research, hoping to contribute to the fight against the disease that had once threatened my life. It felt like a fitting way to give back and support others facing similar struggles. Cecilia eventually completed her studies and found a job at a nearby hospital. We celebrated her achievements, and she expressed her gratitude for the support and stability the house had provided her. As a token of appreciation, I gifted her the house, knowing it would be in good hands. She had been a pillar of strength for me, and this was my way of saying thank you. With the house now hers, I decided it was time for a fresh start. I found a charming cottage on the outskirts of town, surrounded by nature and tranquility. Moving there felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one where I could leave the painful memories behind and embrace the future with optimism. In my new home, I continued to build connections with my neighbors and became an active member of the community. Christina remained a close friend, and we often collaborated on community projects, further strengthening our bond. As the years went by, I found a renewed sense of purpose and joy. The experience of battling cancer and dealing with abandonment had reshaped my perspective on life. I learned to appreciate the small moments, the kindness of strangers, and the resilience of the human spirit. Reflecting on my journey, I realized that the adversity I faced had ultimately led me to a place of peace and fulfillment. My ex-wife and daughter had tried to take everything from me, but they couldn't touch the core of who I was. I had emerged stronger, surrounded by genuine relationships and a community that cared. Life had a way of surprising you, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. While I couldn't change the past, I had control over my future. And with every new day, I chose to live it fully, with gratitude and hope for what was yet to come.